There are cliches you can't use. I understand how you're feeling is one, because you don't understand how they're feeling. Unless you're qualified to say, I've lost my child who was 17 in a road traffic accident, exactly the same as you don't know how to feel them. So it's something you should never say. Phrases like, it's been such a waste, is nothing but a complete can of worms to a mother or a wife, because having lost their child, they don't want to know that, or want to think that it's been fruitless or it's a waste. Your moments have to be judged based on the ever-changing scenario that's presented in front of you. So mum will frequently change her thoughts and her opinions on something, and you have to be balanced enough to understand where that thought is about to take her, and indeed sometimes the whole mood of the conversation and the mood of the room, because she'll sometimes be speaking for everybody, not just herself. And it's important not to be a disciple at this point. You have to be a leader, and you have to lead them through what effectively is misery. The hardest things are normally the ones that you didn't realise it was going to be this difficult. And I'll give you a couple of very good examples. We sometimes pay a little bit lip service to returning the kit and equipment to the family. If the soldier has died overseas, the repatriation can sometimes catch you unawares of how difficult that really is going to be. If it's a multiple repatriation, and you've been very calm and composed right up until that moment, you walk into the reception at RF Lynham, and you see 3 or 4 other families who are all receiving their loved ones back, and you bump into a granny who's just inconsolable. You won't be able to keep it together. Or you bump into a 4 or 5-year-old child who's just on the cusp of realising he's lost his father. You won't be able to hold it together. I think also the subtleties, such as returning an individual's kit to the mother, the watch, the ring, the wallet, the personal memories, the photograph albums, returning them, you have to be aware that these are extremely painful to the family. And if you don't judge that moment correctly, it will cause great pain to the family. It needs to be done more or less as a military operation. You have to think through how you're going to do this. For example, if you preserved a particular ground, like the home, and not taken any of the miserable things back to the home, you've taken everything in an army camp or a military establishment where you can deliver things with a degree of comfort. That's the ideal place to return the property of the deceased, in a quiet, confined space, possibly on a one-to-one basis, just the VO and the mother, or the VO and the widow. Don't involve children, and it just gives the widow or the mother the opportunity to grieve in private, because all these things that she's going to say will bring back memories potentially 30 years old. Other very difficult issues are insurance claims. It's not something that you think would present a problem, but the exact cause of death is to be entered on an insurance claim. This is seen as a trade for the life of a loved one. Guiding somebody through an insurance claim is something that I think you should be prepared for. Coping with the amount of communications needs a strategy. You need a strategy to deal with the amount of communication somebody's going to get. Letters from the Prime Minister, letters from the royal family, letters from serving soldiers, letters from serving senior officers, letters from friends, and indeed sometimes letters from people who don't like servicemen, enemies of the armed forces. Once your address is in the public domain, or your name's in the public domain, it's not hard to Google your name and find out where you live and send you something unsavoury. Dealing with that is also something that you should be fairly prepared for. Relentless telephone calls is another thing. If you allow the same person to answer the phone time in, time out, they will become completely washed out with the amount of conversation that they have to listen to and have to give. So trying to filter the conversations and produce and have in front of the main family a way of diverting that telephone to somebody else who can absorb the mainstay of telephone calls would be extremely useful. And you're just preserving the family's energy for what you have to communicate to them, which is slightly more important than Joe Bloggs wanting to ring up and say, I'm sorry, I've just heard such and such has died and I just want to say sorry. There are lots of people who want to come and say they're, very sorry to hear the news, but at that moment in time, there are important issues that have to be addressed and have to be dealt with, and you have to have full vision of them issues, and you have to be able to take them issues to their conclusion. Right from the off, you're up against a timeline. Timelines are normally a repatriation followed by a funeral, and they're always quite tight, and you don't have an awful lot of time to allow people to distract you from what you've got to get the family through. The things that you struggle to deal with are the ones that make you extremely angry. So, for example, whilst at home enjoying a quiet moment with my family, my phone goes and it's a widow, and she's absolutely distraught because there is a news reporter at her door wanting to know how she feels about the war in Iraq. Now, this chap had turned up at the worst possible moment because they were just celebrating the birthday of the soldier who died. It was most conceivably the worst opportunity for somebody to knock at the door anyway, but to ask somebody what they thought of the conflict at that time had me extremely angry, to the point where I jumped in my car to drive around to chat to this individual. There are a number of other things which you really just don't expect that bring you to the point of anger. Sometimes it's dealing with our own bureaucracy. Sometimes it's dealing with agencies. That the army seems to have an awful lot of agencies that we deal with now. You deal with them, and it's like dealing with a call centre at times. They put you on hold, and you really want to burst out with the, do you know I am fighting a war in a miserable part of this world for you to have the right to stick me on hold, which is a crazy scenario, and that will always catch you unawares, is how the emotions built up in you, then all of a sudden it manifests itself in such a bizarre way that it catches you unaware. And then there's the emotional triggers that are always unexpected. And I talked about the repatriation of the kit and equipment for the individual, seeing the wedding ring for the first time, seeing the wallet for the first time, receiving somebody's mobile phone back for the first time, the texts inside that mobile phone that maybe you sent hours before, that were sent hours before the individual died, birthday cards unopened because the individual didn't receive them before he died, but they were in transit during that period of time when they come back to you. These are things that you thought you'd put away and dealt with, and find yourself having to revisit that particular moment you're not prepared for. The family will go through peaks and troughs, and sometimes in very bizarre circumstances they will find a light moment in which you can't comprehend, and then other times when you're looking for a light moment you just can't find it. I think that the pain is completely shared. because as a soldier you understand what the wife of a soldier is going through, and you understand what the mother of a soldier is going through, because I can promise you at some stage you've talked to your wife about the possibilities of you dying on operations. You'll have talked to your mum, or your mum will have talked to you about the possibility of dying on operations. So you know the conversations they're likely to have had. You know the feelings that they're likely to have been feeling at that time. I think you need to understand that although you can have these thoughts run through your head before you do this, the true experience is far worse. And unless you take preventative measures, countermeasures, to protect yourself from what you're going to go through, you'll find it very difficult to deliver the information you need to give to the family and to lead the family through that particular scenario, because you'll be suffering the pain yourself. And as an example, I will say that the first time I did VO, the pain was so raw that at times I struggled to see what I needed to do for the family. The second time round, not only did I know what I needed to do for the family, which was get them through the process of a funeral and the process of an inquest with as minimum pain as was possible, but also to protect myself against the pain that I was about to go through, and protect myself against the impact that it has on my life. Because you cannot suffer the misery of losing a close friend and dealing with the loss of a colleague, and dealing with a grieving widow and grieving children without feeling some of that affect yourself. In fact, you feel an awful lot of that pain. You then take that pain back to your family, who aren't connected to this at all, and they need to know your emotional instability is going to wash off on them. On the second time I went through this, the first person I spoke to was my wife, to say, as I go through this process again, I will be slightly vulnerable, I will be slightly stressed, I will be at times uncooperative, and at times extremely difficult, and they will be as a result of my visits to the family. I will bring all that misery back home, and I'll bring it into the sanctuary of our house, which is exactly like every other house you'd imagine, with young children running around the house trying to get on with their normal daily life, totally unaware of what I'm going through, because we choose not to take this back into our house. But actually you need to discuss all these things with your family, so as they know the reason you're not speaking that evening is because you've just done the repatriation of one of your closest friends. You will go through the emotions that people use as rubber stamps, the anger, the sympathy, the question of faith. You'll go through all them, and they may arrive in random order. Yeah, I remember being extremely angry at being told I was going to be VO for the second time. I wasn't angry at the fact that I'd been tasked. I was angry at the fact that I just lost a very dear friend. So I was angry at absolutely everything. But that anger needs to be contained, and it needs to be boxed away quite comfortably and put in a place where it doesn't show. And again, that links very well to what I was talking about before, because at some stage you're going to have to talk about that anger. Who you discuss it with is your call. On the second time around, I found it easy to discuss with my wife, because she'd seen me go through it for the first time. On the first occasion, I kept it between me and the Padre, because the Padre, for all the right reasons, is there to lend a guiding hand to the VO as much as he is to the family. And maybe sometimes you don't realise that initially, but the second time around, I found myself chatting extensively to the Padre about absolutely everything, from football to the meaning of life to, you know, how we were going to do the order of service. And found him second time round to be a fountain of all knowledge and extremely balanced just when I needed it. It's difficult to give advice to anybody who's got to go through this, but I would say that if you really want to give the best possible service to the family, you have to look after yourself. You have to be aware that you are going to go through misery, and you've got to do what we used to think was unthinkable. For me to speak to the Padre meant I wanted to tell the Padre to toughen up and tell the blokes who were going to him to grow up and get a spine. You know, at my age now, I realise that the Padre's got so much more to offer. And all the people who, in my life, I've always considered to be a bit woolly and a bit non-combatant, because my job is to kill and close with the enemy. These people are actually the moral component that I never fully understood. Now I understand the value of the moral component a lot better now than ever before. It's the moral component that you as a VO need to go and open up and explore so as it can keep you strong and focused. For when the family question faith, it needs to be you who is their faith. When the family question loyalty, it needs to be you who is their loyalty. And I think when the family question the reasons we do what we do, it needs to be you who can give them the unequivocal answer and ensure them that what we do for a living is probably one of the only noble jobs left for somebody to pursue.